In Florida, a woman named Christy L. claims that she observed an astonishing sight. It is unlike anything I've ever heard in all of paranormal literature. It was July 2013, and she was staying with some friends in a small town about 30 miles north of Orlando, Florida. She recalled that it was around 9 p.m., and she had gone outside to watch the sky, something she did almost every night. It was something she loved to do. When I looked up at the moon, which was almost directly overhead, I actually looked away to rub my eyes because I couldn't believe what I saw. When I looked back, it was still there and no illusion. There, flying around the moon in a clockwise direction from my point of view, were these enormous beings, which looked like flying dragons. By the very slow swoop of their bat-like wings, I could tell they were truly huge. There were dozens of them, but when I looked up higher, there were tiers and tiers of them, all circling in the same direction, and there must have been over 100 of them. They were all black, being silhouetted by the moon above them, so I could see no colors or details. Christy noted that these creatures had an almost reptile-like quality. She estimated the lowest ones were about 500 feet up, though she couldn't be sure. As she stood at the end of the driveway looking skyward at the bizarre sight, the thought occurred to her that if she was watching them, it was possible that some of them might be watching her. She wanted to run inside and alert her friends, but she was too afraid to move. Just then I noticed an enormous craft, slowly approaching from the right of where the beings flew. It was around a dozen times the width of the moon and blacker than black, in the classic saucer shape, but there was no dome, or any lights or windows. But I noticed something I'd never heard mentioned before, and that there was this eerie black wispy curling mist all along the edge of the ship, which I thought it must be some type of cloaking device. The ship was totally silent as it slowly approached where the creatures flew, never speeding up or slowing down or stopping. Finally, it engulfed the entire area where the dragons flew, and when it inched away, the night sky was again empty, save for stars and the moon. Christy ran into the home and told her friends, who were convinced that she'd merely seen bats or birds. I know what I witnessed, and it was something I'd never before seen and hoped to never see again. I do have an idea of what happened, only a guess. But you know how when people are out boating, they will sometimes jump into the water for a refreshing swim? Well, maybe those creatures left their craft to stretch those terrible wings and were just circling there, waiting for their ship to catch up with them to get back on board. Christy noted that for days after the experience, she worried that the entities might return, but they never did. Thankfully, if they saw me, I wasn't considered a threat. This is a true experience, and one that is enough to last a lifetime.
I know that when I read this case, I sent it to Albert, and I asked him, I said, what did you think of this? And he said, I don't know. He said, like, I don't know what to make of it. It's just a really strange case. And I kind of thought that was weird. I didn't know if he was having trouble believing the case or if it was just too strange for him, but he deals with a lot stranger things than I've ever read or whatever. So I don't know what it was. But when I read the case, I was intrigued because I know that Florida has been getting a lot of gargoyle type cases, flying gargoyle humanoid type things, and I know that I made a video about a whole bunch of gargoyle sightings that were happening down in Zephyr Hills, and I thought that maybe she was seeing not dragons, or she thought they might be reptilians. I thought maybe she was seeing these gargoyle type entities just from the sounds of it. And she saw what she described was like the sky was basically filled with these creatures. I got this image in my head of like Wizard of Oz when the flying monkeys were taking off. That's what I thought of. It was just the sky just filled with these creepy creatures. And And it kind of makes me wonder, like, what's going on? Like, what's going on down in Florida where they're having all these weird flying creature sightings?
The events of this story occurred in 1977 and involved an encounter with a strange entity the witness described as the Grim Reaper. A woman named Dee Gallo claims that in June 1977, her husband, who was in the military, was stationed in Rome, New York. They found a small trailer about the size of a Winnebago in the village of Blossvale and decided to make it their home. They were happy for a couple of months. As per her routine, Dee would wake up early in the morning, fix a large breakfast for her husband, and then go back to bed when he left for work. She would often sleep until about 9 a.m. One morning in August, I awoke with a start and knew that someone was staring at me. I was laying in bed with my feet facing the back door and my back to the living room and front door. I rolled over and almost bumped into this dark figure leaning over me. It looked like the Grim Reaper, full size and terrifying. Now, up until this moment, I always thought that the Grim Reaper was a fictitious character made up long ago for Halloween, but he was standing over me. I was terrified. Dee claims that she became nearly hysterical. She panicked and ducked under her covers and began to pray. When she got up the nerve to look beneath the blanket, she noticed that the figure was gone. About a week later, the events repeated, and she began to become very concerned with her safety and her own mental health. I finally told my husband what had happened. He got this strange look on his face, and I took it that he thought I was crazy, so I dropped the subject and tried not to think of it. I kept telling myself that I was crazy and imagining things simply because I didn't like the alternative. The thought of it left me trembling. About 2 weeks after the second appearance, it happened again. This time Dee awoke with the now familiar feeling of someone staring at her. It had returned. I lay there considering my possibilities. I could continue to hide under my covers and eventually let it get me or face it. I figured I'd rather die facing the situation. Now, I don't know that I would call it courage, but something made me be able to roll over and fling back the covers to confront this thing. I had never seen its face before as its hood was in the way. While to my surprise, as I flung the covers off me and sat up on the side of the bed, it recoiled from me. It brought its arms up and crossed them over what would be its face. But it had no face, just empty darkness within the hood opening. As I come up off the bed, it turned and took off in one fluid motion towards my kitchen. I looked down at its feet, and it had no feet, and was about 4 to 5 inches off the floor. Well, seeing as how this thing was fleeing from me, I worked up the nerve to yell at it, to leave me alone and never come back. Dee peered around the wall to look into her kitchen, and surprisingly, it was not there. She noted that had it left through one of the 2 doors, she would have been able to see it from where she was standing in her bedroom. Believe me, I was waiting for something to exit via one of the doors, but it didn't. It just disappeared. Many years later, Dee still wonders what the entity was after, and what the visits meant, if they meant anything at all. Curiously, in 1995, 18 years after the encounters, Dee brought up the subject once more to her husband. I wanted to know if he thought I was crazy, or just what did he think about it. He ruefully told me that he got that funny look on his face when I told him about it because the Reaper had visited him also, and in this same time frame that it visited me. He told me that it had grabbed him by the ankle on 2 separate occasions and shook it until he was awake. He said that when he would wake up and look at it, it would disappear. Dee admits that her husband's confession shocked her. He told her that the entity terrified him, but did not want to say anything to her, as it would only work to frighten her, and honestly, he didn't know what to do about it anyways. How do you fight something that is not even supposed to be real?
I know of a case that I think it was a sheriff down in Texas said that he he had encountered this guy walking down the highway. He was wearing a robe, and he said he had pulled up, alongside him, and he was gonna find. It was in the middle of nowhere. He was gonna find out what was going on, and he said that this figure turned, this robed figure, and he said he had no face. It was just black where the face should be. It was just, and he said that he thought it was the Grim Reaper. And that's what this witness pretty much described, the exact same thing. I know Mark Travinsky, the late editor of the Strange magazine, he used to collect these Grim Reaper cases, and he had a number of these types of cases where people described seeing these Grim Reaper type entities, these hooded entities that had no face. Most people know that I worked at a factory. I mentioned it in a previous video. I worked there for a lot of years, and when I was there, I used to have to work up in this upstairs area, doing things like picking mail and stuff like that. But it was more of a secure area, so I had to work with a security guard sometimes, and we spent a lot of time talking about lots of stuff. And we eventually got into the paranormal because, of course, that's what I'm interested in. And she had a whole bunch of stuff to tell me just about the factory itself and all the weird things that the different security guards had seen over the years just in the factory. And somehow we ended up talking like she didn't have many personal experiences, but she had one that kind of stood out, and it was in her family. It involved a Grim Reaper type character. Apparently, I guess I don't know if it was her or her sister, I think, when they were a baby. She told me that her mother and father had walked into the room or something, and there was this figure standing over the crib, looking down at the baby. And they said that the way, I guess, her mother and father, whatever, described it, it was a classic Grim Reaper with the cloak and the hood, and he even had like the Sith thing, and they said he had like a skeleton type face, and I guess it looked up at them, and then it just sort of vanished. And that's what she said, and she said she absolutely believes in it. It terrified her or her parents or whatever. So anyways, the thing is, like, I even asked her, like, what do you think that meant? If you had this figure there, what do you think it meant? We don't know. We don't know what it meant because nothing ever happened. Nothing ever happened to like, I know it was her or sister, but nothing ever happened regardless. And that's what she said. It was just this classic Grim Reaper type figure was standing over the crib looking down, and they walked in, he looked up at them, and then just sort of vanished. And there's a lot of reports very, very similar to that, where people encounter these Grim Reaper type entities and then they just sort of vanish.